And that journey of my own healing started quite late because I was somewhat stuck as a scientist in what is referred to as materialistic views of the world. If we really want to connect to nature, there's a spiritual dimension to it, which I failed to recognize. And so I started to research, of course, the neuroscience of bathing in nature, what happens to our consciousness, what happens to our nervous system, and felt like I was really invited to share what I could, collect and even my own stories to awake others in that journey.
Welcome to the Enchanted Earth Podcast, where you will hear stories of nature with the power to transform our lives. These sacred stories are begging to be shared now. So listen in as my guest today shares one of their own.
Okay. So welcome, everybody. Today we have with us Christophe Morin, and let me tell you a little bit about him. Dr. Christophe Morin is an internationally recognized author, scientist, and educator whose work sits at the intersection of neuroscience, psychology, marketing, and artificial intelligence. For more than 2 decades, he's advanced the discipline of neuromarketing, demonstrating how the brain's primal systems shape attention, emotion, and decision-making, and how organizations can communicate more ethically and effectively as a result. So welcome, Christophe.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, yes. I am excited to hear about some stories that you're going to share with us today, at least one. And I know that you have a very strong interest in the whole neuroscience, how the brain connects with our lived experience. And I'm interested to see where that will take us today.
Me too.
So first, I always like to ask, can you tell us a little bit about the land that raised you?
Sure. I was born in France in a small rural village with medieval, architecture and lots of history. Of course, when I grew up, that small, quiet village felt like a punishment to a young boy who wanted to explore the world and be stimulated every day. So I actually only later realized how lucky I was to be in this splendid nature environment. But my dream was always to move out as quickly as I could. I pursued some graduate studies in a city called Nantes, near the west coast of France, but quickly wanted to actually move on to a master's degree in the US, which I did in 1982, and that changed forever my desire to essentially leave my country, which I have now for 37 years. Though you never leave a country, you just displace your living situation, and I do return to my homeland often. And now I do have a much more appreciation for the beautiful landscape. The rural landscape in France is pretty much in every single spot, other than, of course, the Paris monstrous city, which has its own charm. But France is a big garden in many ways.
Wow. So as a child, were you in that garden often?
I actually was often walking, and I had a companion dog that would go with me everywhere. I was a runner very early in my life. I felt like the run in nature was my ultimate way to fight that melancholy that often made me a little both introverted and somber.
And you felt this embrace perhaps by the nature around you?
I did. I was very lucky because I never felt like I was missing anything other than the presence of my father, who was a very successful entrepreneur and had built a large company employing nearly 50% of the village adults. And I think I was longing for more interaction with adults. My siblings, both my older brother and sister, had been sent to a boarding school, which I thought was quite cruel, not just to them, but to me, since I didn't have their company most of my teenage years.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah, that's difficult, being the only one then, really.
I did have a younger sister, but as a young boy with 3 ages of difference, you really want to play with your little sister. You just want to have, boys around you. So
Yeah. All right, Christophe. So, do you have a story that really kind of comes to mind about a maybe moving experience that you had in nature and what it meant for you?
oh boy, I would say it's really more in the last 15 years that I've come to appreciate not just nature in its beauty and splendor, but in its power to heal. And that journey of my own healing started quite late because I was somewhat stuck as a scientist in what is referred to as materialistic views of the world. In other words, nature in many ways can be objectified and not felt as this form of consciousness in which we bathe every day. If we really want to connect to nature, there's a spiritual dimension to it, which I failed to recognize, as most materialistic scientists do. And my work in really taking seriously my own healing obviously taught me many more lessons about what nature can do, not just to me, but to everybody. And so I started to research, of course, the neuroscience of bathing in nature, what happens to our consciousness, what happens to our nervous system, and felt like I was really invited to share what I could, collect and even my own stories to awake others in that journey.
Oh, well, can you share one of those with us?
So I think the book that I published last year is where a lot of this investigation is revealed, along with another book that I published during the COVID crisis in 21 called The Serenity Code. COVID for me, just as a context, was quite dramatic. Like most of us, I'm not gonna, suggest my impact or my crisis or my drama was certainly more severe than those that had direct physical impact of the disease. I never have had actually COVID. But for me as a speaker, as a researcher, I found myself essentially grounded in Honolulu, which is not exactly the worst city to be during COVID, but felt like I was, facing a major existential crisis, not being able to move around, be invited to speak, connect with the chemistry of people who want to engage with the quite exciting topics that I usually have, really propelled me into a pretty severe depression.
Did you know that this podcast was inspired by my book, The Enchanted Earth? These life affirming conversations spark joy and affirm your own magical experiences. Purchase links are below in the show notes. Now back to today's guest.
And I did not feel like I could simply just medicate or numb this issue. I had to really confront it, specifically from what I felt was a neuro-spiritual perspective. So neuro to provide the science behind what was happening to me neurobiologically speaking, which I've always been very interested in my own brain and the responses that I can analyze from it. But spiritual because I was beginning to really connect to this realm of non-materialistic phenomena that are clearly portals to a lot of healing. And nature as such, I feel, is one of those portals that with the right mindset of reverence and gratitude and of course consciousness, mindfulness is really extraordinarily powerful. So the COVID crisis really woke me up to the potential. It took me several years to essentially practice and ritualize my connection to nature. And the pivotal moment in my sort of awakening was going to Peru for an entire month. Lived in a Shipibo village and received shamanic initiation and worked with a brew called ayahuasca. And under ayahuasca, which is a national treasure in Peru and protected by the Constitution, you are likely to experience what most psychedelics do, and that is expand your consciousness, produce some visuals. Some call it hallucinations. I think the word is often distorted in its meaning and in its description. But essentially, you are likely to receive, whether you believe it's received or just manufactured by your brain, you're going to experience visuals that often are indeed related to nature and are indeed confirming that nature has special messages. And Shipibo believe that all plants have spirits, and all plants are here on earth, not just to, help us feed ourselves, but also heal ourselves. Most pharmaceuticals are in effect, at the core, engineered from the chemistry of plants. And so we have not just used this power of nature, but survived from the power of nature. And being in nature and having the gratitude and openness to see it as this ultimate healer has changed my relationship with it forever, you could say.
Wow. Well, your decision to go on this shamanic journey, how did that come about? I mean, you didn't just wake up one morning and say, I think I'm going to go to Peru for a month.
No, I have done a lot of this work over the last 15 years, mostly, of course, in countries where it is legal, such as Brazil and Peru. It's not easy work. It requires a lot of discipline around preparation for these ceremonies. The ceremonies are all very, very much sacred gatherings where there's a number of, rules and without being dogmatic, a certain preparation is required in terms of diet, in terms of cleaning your body, you could say even your spirit, to receive the sacrament of these medicines. And so I was longing for an opportunity to truly disconnect from my modern life. I've always been extremely committed to, teaching. I do higher ed teaching at Johns Hopkins and Fielding Graduate University. I travel now, not as much as I used to. So I'm constantly plugged into, the different tools you can imagine, particularly the internet and AI and others. So I felt like I was really ready for a break, and that the break would be not just, let's go fishing, but an opportunity to deepen my relationship with the brew and maybe document and produce some valuable notes. I didn't know the extent to which I would furiously write, because I wrote this book called Open in 28 days and finished it once I got back to the US with the proper, enhancements of citations and other things that I couldn't do in my little tumble, which are these, very simple living conditions: one table, one chair, a bed with a net, and that's about it. So I lived through that experience really as a retreat and as an opportunity to really fully appreciate and understand the dimensions of nature. And the Amazonian jungle is almighty and has so much to reveal to us in terms of its power to heal, but also its power to kill. And so the humbling aspect of this all is really shedding as much of your ego as you can to enhance your capacity to connect to the spirit of the plants.
That is a wonderful opportunity to do that, to just spend a month really disconnected and immersed. Can you share with us a specific opportunity where you received some message from an aspect of nature that really maybe changed your worldview or confirmed to you what you always thought was true?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Have you ever heard of a construct, I guess, called the Indra Net?
I have, but if you could just share a little bit of what it is.
So during one of my 10 sessions in Peru, I had typically in that 3 to 4 hour experience that each of those sessions are, you're likely to have several threads. And part of what makes this work with the brew particularly powerful is the opportunity to receive a lot of powerful, but also not always necessarily cryptic, but very much instructive lessons, if you will, from the plant. If you accept that this is not necessarily coming from your brain, but it might tap into some sort of download, which for me as a scientist, I'm just insisting here, is a big leap in my ability to now really fully accept and understand that might be the case. I received specifically in multiple times an opportunity to see, either my eyes closed or my eyes open, the breathing of the world. And the Indra Net is the name that Hindus tradition have called this fabric, not necessarily under any particular psychedelic, but they believe there is in fact a way to connect and see the fact that the world at a very molecular, possibly even quantum level, completely interconnected. And the gridding is, in fact, that particular visual way to illustrate what the Indra Net is. Now, I didn't know anything about the Indra Net. Never heard the name, never, looked at an article, and I didn't, in the experience, receive the term Indra Net. I just received the download, did copious notes about it, and fed it into AI when I came back, and boom, what was presented to me was this old and very well known in the Buddhist tradition belief of the gridding and the interconnectedness of everything. And it was quite splendid, if not frankly stunning, to see that this visual effect would happen both when my eyes were closed and when my eyes were open.
While you were under the influence of the brew.
That's right. That's right.
Wow. Can you, in your best, whatever words you can conjure, to give us a sense of what that visual looked like?
In my notes in Open, I described it as a cosmic web with light. And so every node of this web represented, at least in my mind, a piece of everything. It's similar to the concept of hologram. A hologram is this really quite remarkable visual effect. But if you package in a hologram and extract just a little piece of it, it contains the entire whole. It contains everything at a different scale, right? And so it felt like I was tapping into, of course, the ever presence of other life forms, other beings, including those that we don't necessarily think are sentient, rocks and other more hard matter objects and so on. So when I really started to apply or access this knowledge, this new belief of everything is interconnected, it gives you a different level of vibration, of alignment to nature, to animals, to even yourself. So it's difficult to explain, and it's difficult to put words to it because of the uniqueness of that experience. And I've had it since then multiple times. And so it's not something that I believe I'm the only one to have ever experienced. In fact, I've shared this, as you know, in most of those ceremonial experiences groups are sharing, which is very insightful, especially to learn the degree to which these brews can not just give you, light shows, but also produce enormous healing. I've witnessed people, quitting alcohol or pretty hard substances in one session. And so this was, at least for me, a confirmation that nature, as we know it, has this incredible power to heal us, but also that what we do to nature often is devastating to the integrity and you could say the structural connections that we have among each other. In other words, it might actually be damaged by the abuse or the disrespect that many of us, and I say I'm as responsible as others, engage with respect to climate change, pollution, and so on.
Yet the image you got was that it was whole, and I'm putting words in your mouth. Did you sense the neglect or disrespect in that image that you saw, or did it just reflect the beauty and wholeness?
Well, since I was surrounded by beauty, fortunately, most of my experience was in nature, in the part of the world which is under the threat of climate change and may have irreparable problems already. But the people that live in these villages, Shipibo is a population that has been around 15, 20,000 years. It's not very clear. But the tradition of using the brew to connect to spirit is, in fact, thousands of years old. So they really, in their own behavior, demonstrate the way you treat nature. with reverence, with respect, with understanding that we are guests. We're custodians, not users, not abusers, certainly. And so there was just so much to learn from being, embedded into the fabric of the way Shipibos live with nature and treat it. So I took that into not just my book, I took that into a deep understanding of how we can ritualize our connection to nature. And by that, I mean really set appointments whereby you're connecting at a more sacred and deeper level than just breathing the air and looking at a plant in passing. I feel that I'm really bathing in nature and very intentionally calling upon its ability to restore the balance of my nervous system and create homeostasis. When I'm a little stressed, I know that my best friend is nature. When I'm a little fragmented, I know that my best friend is nature. So I seek that connection at a much deeper and a much more sacred level.
Yeah, it's interesting that we come across this understanding of the power of how nature can heal us, but we first have to have that crisis. Often, we have to get to a point in our lives when we so desperately need a change in our worldview. And I'm just curious, is there a specific story of how you were impressed to change your worldview of things? Like, you are a scientist by training, and at some point there was a little crack or a little opening saying, maybe there's something more to this human experience that I'm just not getting. Do you know when that happened and how it occurred?
Yeah, I think I point to COVID as probably the triggering point, but I knew before that I was overdoing it, stretching and putting a lot of stress on many of my personal resources. When you put, as I have, probably close to 4 million miles of travel at 5,000 feet, it has an impact on your body. It has an impact on your nervous system. And I sort of took for granted my energy and my capacity to conduct, an insane amount of workshops in so many countries. So I could tell that by the end of 2018, 19, I was starting to feel unhealthy and toxic, and I didn't like it. And COVID was the opportunity given in many ways at the right time for me to have a forced interruption.
Right,
and like most pilots of airplanes, I just couldn't fight this one. I couldn't defy this one. I had to stay quiet and I had to stay still, which I had never learned to do. And so it was long coming, but what I took out of it is a real gift, a real opportunity to research with the knowledge that I had sort of commercialized in the area of advertising effectiveness. I knew already a lot about the brain and the nervous system, and I recognized that I could slide a lot of that knowledge and put my focus not so much on helping people, make more money selling whatever products or services they sell, but really focus on some of the most interesting ways we can particularly intersect fields of science. I describe myself as a polymath. I suspect you have heard that term before. And I've always been not just interested in neuroscience or marketing, but the crossing of neuroscience with other fields like psychology, like spirituality, like quantum physics, cosmology, and so on. And I find that, scientists lack often the will and the desire to step up and leave the dogmatic version of their field of expertise. And I was like that for many, many years until I wasn't.
It's like curiosity to things outside your trained sector. It is like you were saying, everything is connected, and to act as if it is not is really crazy. I think we're all starting to.
It's what's crazy is that we don't recognize it, and so many people are still not educated on the power of nature to heal. In all my research, I found one particular country that has done more research on the healing power of nature, and it is Japan. In Japan, the actual concept of forest bathing is prescribed by medical doctors for people who are under too much stress or anxiety. And most of the really important papers, scientific papers, on the healing power of nature. And when I say papers, I mean experiments, documented investigations of people who have high blood pressure issues, immune disorders, stress, and so on, that receive, if you will, documented dosage of being in nature and ultimately improve on all fronts their health. So this is not just woo-woo science or pseudoscience, it's actually hard science. And it's really incredible that we are not seeing more of this teaching shared across medias and be also included in curriculums on wellness and health and so forth.
Yeah. I think we're heading in that direction. It's taking a while, but I feel that it'll eventually become more of a common understanding that we need nature. Yeah. I'm curious. I just had a thought, so I figure I'll ask and we can cut this out if we need to. But I'm curious if you have an active dream life and if there was any dreams that any nature being came to you without ayahuasca, but just like, was there anything like that as you were kind of pivoting toward nature as healer?
So yes, I'm a pretty intense dreamer. I'm actually a lucid dreamer,
Uh-huh.
which means that I can interact, and often it's during a dream that is either annoying or a bit too intense that I have that signal that I'm dreaming and I can end it. But so in my dream life, of course, nature has always played an important role, but it's never been as special as when I had experienced the Indra Net. And again, understanding at a biological level what is happening when you ingest a brew like ayahuasca, you're really changing the distribution of critical neural messengers, which are called neurotransmitters, like dopamine and particularly serotonin. And those changes do not happen when you dream. I'm not saying dreaming is not important or doesn't carry lots of messages. I'm sure it does, but the experience is completely different than when you are under the effect of a brew like ayahuasca.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. When you first did ayahuasca, so you had decided to do this 1-month retreat, but that was after you had already experienced it and you knew what to kind of expect, I would assume. Your first experience, can you share a little bit about that? Like, how did it measure up to what you expected it to be, or was it like we would expect it? I'm just curious.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it was nearly 20 years ago. And at the time, I was not at all really interested or committed to a process of spiritual awakening, if you will. I was just intrigued scientifically and frankly, mostly quite worried about the possibility that it could damage even my own brain. So I entered this relationship with a lot of fear. And what was actually taught to me in that first session is that fear does rule a lot at the time, ruled a lot of my psychological, coping mechanism. And as a result, I was quite anxious and very much driven by negative, emotions. And I also have always developed a profound liking, you could say, for a psychological framework called the Enneagram. I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram, but it's basically a typology of personality profiles that have 9 archetypal names that actually describe any of us. And in the Enneagram typology, I'm a number 6, which is indeed the most, you could say, activated type under worries and fear and anxiety. And so I knew to some extent that so much of my experience confirmed right away that my journey, you could say my calling, was to change that, was to release so much of that in my life on a daily basis, whether it's in business, whether it's in my relationship with my children, my relationship with my wife. I could tell that ayahuasca was pointing right away in the most bizarre fashion to the core wounding of my personality. And ever since that first session, I've been on a mission to do that. And it's been quite remarkable, particularly in the last few years, how much I have, through this ritualization, through this opening, through this capacity to recognize the power of not just the ritual of being in nature, but the power of meditation, the power of paying attention to your dreams, the power. I have identified and opened 26 rituals, and I practice most of them every single day. Now, it sounds like crazy, but many of them are just simply habits that are converted into rituals. For instance, when you eat, you can just jump right into your food and start eating, or you can take just a few seconds to celebrate the journey that this food has made. And we produce here on our property in Hawaii quite a lot of fruits, eggs, and other things that really come from our property. And this is really an opportunity to be grateful, to honor, in a way, that moment of putting food into your system. So it's one little habit that often we just barely pay attention to. But if you ritualize it, it's once again an opportunity to set the condition upon which your life becomes more conscious and more aligned with the vibration of the food, the vibration of the nature, the vibration of the people that you're talking to. If you're paying attention to the fact that sometimes your own toxicity, let's say if you're nervous or anxious, is contagious. And so if I really want to do this for myself, it's going to also affect others. That's part of the Indra Net. If my own coping mechanisms are not as toxic, as contagious, well, guess what? It will make people around us less toxic and less contagious. So all that takes years to practice and integrate, but the more you put it into your life as these cycles of what I call rituals, which are by definition like habits, are more conscious and are more non-negotiable. In other words, a habit or certain behaviors are sometimes contingent upon, the weather being nice, or I'm in a good mood, I'm going to do things. Rituals do not tolerate excuses. If you're truly committed to a meditation practice or to treating nature respectfully, ritually, you don't do it when you want to. You do it because it's part of your contract with nature. It's part of your contract with the other people that you want to be around you with flow, serenity, and joy.
And we need more of that than ever before on this planet right now. More conscious individuals who are living with respect, acknowledgement, with ritual. That is so beautiful, Christophe.
Mm-hmm.
So beautiful.
Well, I'm not exactly the creator of these practices. And when I started researching many of them, what was interesting is to see how some can be thousands of years old. And we have only recently produced more, shall we say, scientific evidence of the benefit of being in nature, or the benefit, for instance, from a health standpoint, of engaging with entheogens, which describe the plant medicine that we know are being quite seriously investigated as options, treatment options. Ketamine has already been approved for this particular use, which is not a plant medicine. It's actually a synthetic product, but a lot of the elements of ketamine do exist in plants. Of course, psilocybin, magic mushrooms, is now quite far in the process of being federally approved for the treatment, particularly of PTSD and other really terrifying conditions that so many people are fighting, especially veterans. So I'm really hopeful that we're beginning to finally recognize the power of these types of medicine, but it's really because, scientists have finally been either told or taken the initiative of rationalizing what people thousands of years ago have known. So it's a bit disappointing that we have to investigate at the pace that we do when we have so much evidence from thousands and thousands of people that have documented their healing using these substances.
Yeah, Oh, yes. Yes. So we're moving into a new age. So
Yep.
yeah, hopefully the expansiveness, it brings in all of this wisdom that is here for thousands of years. So as we close, Christophe, is there anything you'd like to share before we leave today?
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about what a temenos is. Have you ever heard that term before?
You brought it up the last time and I looked it up and I'm very curious. Please share with us.
So I ran across this during my work on a book that I published last year on the neuro-spiritual basis of the Enneagram. And what really, and it's related to the power of nature. Greeks described the need that we have as people to do our own work, i.e. raise our consciousness, tap into the power of our neuroplasticity, which is essentially the innate gift of being able to heal ourselves. And when I say heal ourselves, I don't mean the traditional view of plasticity is that you can basically recover from breaking a bone or cutting your skin or even a heart attack. But we now know that when we use neuroplasticity, we can also directly tap in our capacity to rewire our reactions, our coping mechanisms. For instance, in my case, I've rewired my brain out of fear. I've rewired my brain out of anxiety completely. And I never thought in my wildest dream that was possible. I was assumed, because I was quite, you could say, aligned with the traditional views of healthcare. You need an expert, you need a neurologist or a neuropsychologist or whatever. I never assumed that I had myself the power to heal. And so through neuroplasticity, there's a lot that you can actually heal. But Greeks believed that we needed a container to do most of that inner work. And they called that container a temenos, Temenos. And Carl Jung then took that to a more mainstream, if you can assume Carl Jung is mainstream. I mean, his writing is so obscure, it's quite amazing that most people actually understand it. I'm a big fan, but I just don't like the cognitive effort associated with decoding, his writing. But anyway, the place and its value in our inner work is really what struck me. And I see nature as a temenos. I see nature as this container that can enhance this inner work. Now, you don't need all nature. You can have a special place of nature. And fortunately, my wife and I own this retreat center now in Kona on this volcanic island, and it's an incredible temenos. It has all the beauty, but also the threat of wild nature. That volcano has erupted now 40 times in 1 year. Now, it's never more than a fountain of lava, but we've also seen in 2018 nearly 1,000 homes swallowed by lava that was flowing in underground tubes and basically popping up, in the garden of many of these houses. So Pele, the goddess of volcano, is revered here as having this majestuous, power to create the island, obviously, but also to destroy it. And this superposition, of course, in the context of this talk, I have to talk a little bit about quantum mechanics, quantum physics. This I feel like living on this island is being in superposition of knowing it's here to protect me. Pele is here to protect me and give me, the fruits that we need, the water that we need for our plants to receive the nutrients that they need, but also can, just explode at any point. And it makes you extremely grateful and extremely present to each day, knowing that this can change at a moment. And it's really helped me, and I think all the people that I see here that tune to the energy, to the temenos of the Big Island, I feel are protected from this craziness around us, and whether it's the politics of this country or the wars that are being shown on Instagram, and every screen you see is basically suggesting the end of the world. And I think we need that bubble. We need that bubble, but not a bubble of of everything is great and paradisiac. The bubble that tells you just stay tuned to now, in the spirit of Edgar Tolle. Let's not go beyond that present experience, and nature can teach us better than anything else.
So well said. It is a special place, the Big Island. I I love the Big Island.
Yeah.
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 We spent a
is.
couple of weeks there, and it was just magical, really magical place. Yes, and all of us need to cultivate that temenos
Mm-hmm.
in our lives. Like you said, wherever we can have a favorite tree that we go out to and sit with, or a beautiful walk through the park that we do with our dog, or whatever place, or even just witnessing a beautiful sunset, which we have every day.
Yep. That's right.
We really need to bring that in more now than ever before. Well, Christophe, thank you so much for being on
You're welcome.
today. It was really wonderful to hear about your stories and how nature has really helped you, bring a sense of what I sense from you is joy and great gratitude
Yep.
for this
Absolutely.
life.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Well said. You're welcome. Thank you so
And
much,
I-
Maureen, for inviting me. Take care.
And I hope all of you who enjoyed this, please share, like, and subscribe, and comment. I will respond to your comments. And have a beautiful day, everybody. Thank you for being a part of the Enchanted Earth podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so that you'll know when we publish another inspiring episode. Check out my book, The Enchanted Earth, available wherever online books are sold. Thank you and have a magical day.